Well, it's that time of the year again, that magical time where once every 12 months you can knock on a stranger's door and expect them to give you processed sugar for absolutely nothing in return. Also a time when costume shops sell out of every sexy nurse or sexy cop outfit they have in stock. Yes, Sonny Jim, it's Halloween, and though I live in a country where Halloween means about as much as a new Prime Minister being sworn in, I do, if nothing else, love any excuse to play a spooky horror game. So I thought I might do a video on some of the better first-person horror games that are out there, and the few that I would recommend people check out to get in the mood. Also, I'm limiting this list to only 8 games, or else we'd all be here until we started bleeding from our assholes. Enough said? Alright, let's get into it. First up is a free-to-play game running on the Gold Source engine called Cry of Fear, developed by Team Sykes-Galar. These guys also worked on another mod for Half-Life called Afraid of Monsters, which is also worth playing. In Cry of Fear, you're playing as a seriously depressed dude named Simon, who's just on his way home one night when things take a turn for the worse. He's apparently hit by a car, blacks out, and then ends up waking up and venturing into Nightmare Land. Basically, it's Silent Hill in Europe with an edgy teenage protagonist. Unsure if what you're seeing is real or not, your only choice is to delve further into your surroundings, fighting off horrific creatures along the way, including one nasty asshole who's always chasing after you with a chainsaw. For a free-to-play game, Cry of Fear is mostly pretty good stuff, but it does have some dodgy elements to its gameplay. The melee combat, for instance, is pretty damn bad. For some reason, your character swipes downward with melee weapons instead of stabbing outwards, so his reach is about as far as a T-Rex. Backtracking in the second half of the campaign is just downright tedious, to the point of it being almost enough to make you want to stop playing. Not to mention, it has limited inventory space like classic survival horror games, which also doesn't help. But the visuals and the layouts of some of the environments, combined with the fantastic sound design, still create some top-notch horror sequences. This is a scary game at times, and it's always going to have you on edge. You also genuinely forget you're playing what's basically a Half-Life mod, because what they've done with the Gold Source engine is just black magic. And thankfully too, it's free to play, but even if they were charging money for this thing, I think it'd still be worth it. So you've got no reason to not check it out. On the subject of Half-Life mods, we've got Grey, a mod for Half-Life 2 developed by Depressic Team. This is another one of those games that takes a few pages out of Silent Hill, throwing you into a dark, nightmarish world where everything looks like it needs to be scrubbed down and cleaned with bleach. And touching anything, you'd probably end up catching hepatitis C or need a tetanus shot. Playing as the eponymous Grey, your initial goal is like Simon's in Cry of Fear, which is just to get home. But I don't think I need to tell you that it doesn't really go to plan. And you take on the typical rogue gallery of horrific looking monsters that make suitably horrific sounds. Visually, Grey is definitely a pretty damn good looking game too, even now in 2019. The modelling for things like weapons and NPCs can look a bit wonky, but the environments themselves still look great. And there's some really cool scripted sequences that are going to catch you off guard. Like Cry of Fear, you're given weapons to defend yourself with, and the only downside is that again, the melee combat often suffers. Grey also offers up 2 different endings depending on whether or not you finish the game on normal or hard mode. So there is a bit of an option for replayability too. And again, like Cry of Fear, the best thing is that the mod is free. So if you've ever wanted to play as a suicidal protagonist but don't want to spend your hard-earned buckaroos doing so, well, this is the game for you.
Why didn't I listen? I'll take care of you.
This one is a bit of a given. I mean, who hasn't heard about Amnesia: The Dark Descent at this point? Made popular by YouTubers back in the day, which might have soiled its reputation a bit, it's still a really well-crafted horror game. If you've played Frictional Games' other series, Penumbra, well, you'll see a lot of similarities. The only difference being that Amnesia feels much more honed than the Penumbra series. In this one, you're playing as some poor asshole who's lost his memory and he finds himself in a mysterious mansion being hunted down by horrible creatures.
What have I done? This is crazy. Don't forget. Don't forget.
You've got no means of defense and your only aid is a lantern with an ever-dwindling oil supply. When an enemy detects you, your only option is to haul ass before you're killed, but most of the time if you're spotted, you're probably gonna die. As you venture deeper and deeper into this mansion, you uncover your own sordid past, the events of which are pretty fucked up. What's good about the game is that it uses jump scares minimally, instead choosing to scare the piss out of you through its atmosphere and sound design. And you know what? It works damn well in that regard. One sequence where you're running from an invisible water monster is just downright pants shittingly terrifying. Just don't go anywhere near the sequel because it sucks. Into the Gloom is a game I think barely anyone has heard of and even fewer people have played. And taking one look at it, you'd probably think it's not even worth trying, but it does a surprisingly good job of scaring the hell out of you on numerous occasions. Again, you're playing as just some poor guy on the run from some horrible looking apparition that's trying to kill him, and wondering where the line between reality and fantasy is being drawn. Into the Gloom throws a few puzzles to solve along the way as well, instead of it just being about holding down the W key for the entire duration of the campaign. The presentation is simplistic, but almost hauntingly so, and despite the pixelated art style, there's still some creepy and unsettling imagery on offer. The visage of this shadow thing that hunts you down periodically is horrifying, and the sound that it makes is the stuff of nightmares. I'm nothing if not a reprehensible indie game shill, so I say check this thing out, if only for the fact that it's dirt cheap and it was made by a single person. Now look, generally I hate walking simulators and I find horror walking simulators even more boring, but Layers of Fear is the exception to the rule, for the simple reason that some of the jump scares and visuals you come across are incredibly creative and really well crafted. The voice acting, the music and the sound design in this one is incredibly polished, combined with this mysterious story about an artist who's working on a painting that he hopes is going to be his magnum opus, dealing with his waning mental state and mysterious past. You'll uncover this backstory about this painter's wife who became really ill and wheelchair bound, and this Victorian era mansion serves as the backdrop for all of these messed up visions that reflect the events of his life. This might be the best looking horror game on the entire list, and despite it only lasting a couple of hours, that's a couple of hours you won't forget. Just don't go in expecting super deep gameplay or anything like that. This is pretty much just walking through a virtual ghost house, where all you need to do is mostly just keep moving forward. Still, it achieves what it sets out to do. Easily one of the most polished games on this list is 2015's Alien Isolation, which is a game that serves as a sequel to the 1979 film where you're playing as Ripley's daughter, Amanda, who's now following in her mum's footsteps and trying to track down her whereabouts.
Identify yourself.
Ripley, from the Torrens.
This brings her to the Sevastopol station, where it turns out that a Xeno has broken loose and turned the place to bedlam. She's separated from her crew and has to repair the damaged station along the way, whilst also avoiding a Xeno that's constantly hunting her down. This formed a pretty big focus on the campaign, as throughout the entire game you're almost always pursued by this thing, and it ends up changing its tactics based off your playstyle. Hide in lockers too many times and it's gonna start searching the lockers. Use a flamethrower to ward it off too much and it will eventually become used to it, making the weapon useless. Aside from that, you're also dealing with haywire synthetics called the Working Joes.
Sleep merchants do dream.
Along with the other survivors on the station who have all gone paranoid and shoot on sight. What's great about Alien Isolation is just how faithful it is to the films. You've got the iconic motion tracker, you've got a flamethrower, and the design of the Xeno looks like it's ripped straight out of the film. Combine it with a well-told story, fantastic visuals and lighting, and just some incredible sound design, and you've got easily one of the best horror games ever made. The thing is, it's not really a fast-paced horror experience. This is a game with a slow burn. Like, it's easily over an hour until you finally encounter the Xeno, and from then on you'll spend a lot of the time crouching and moving slowly to avoid detection, having to hide frequently under beds or in lockers. It's a first-person shooter in the sense that you're playing from a first-person perspective, and yeah, you can shoot things, but managing your noise is key to survival, and getting into combat or sprinting around is going to get you killed pretty quickly. If you can accept that though, Alien Isolation is a must-play.
Someone will be with you shortly.
Even now, playing it in a dark room with my headphones on had me literally sweating bullets. Bullets, son! Lost in Vivo is basically Silent Hill as an FPS, developed by Kira, who also created the Spooky's House of Jumpscare series. Unlike Spooky's though, Lost in Vivo is a fully fledged game with an actual campaign and proper handcrafted environments. In this, you're playing as some guy who chases after his service dog when it falls down a storm drain, only to be sucked into another horrible, shithole looking nightmarish world. The whole thing being a bit of a metaphor for this guy dealing with his own fears and phobias. Lost in Vivo though still somehow manages to offer up lots of creative and creepy sequences, and environments for the player to explore along with some downright fucked up looking enemies. I don't know if I can fully explain just how uneasy I was when playing this thing. I was so on edge when I played it that at one point the simple sound effect of a toilet door opening scared the piss out of me. Ah! Fuck! Lost in Vivo also manages to weave in combat as well, so you're not just running around avoiding monsters. You're actually able to fight back as long as you've got ammo, with a pistol, shotgun, and a goddamn sledgehammer. This is really just a fantastic horror game, even more impressive that it's developed again by basically one person. And I must say, damn good stuff, sir. And finally, we get to the last game on my list, and probably one of the games I think everyone should play at least once in their life. I mean, I don't know how you could ever do a list of first-person horror games and not have Condemned on there somewhere. Developed by Monolith Productions, Condemned Criminal Origins is a first-person horror game with a heavy focus on melee combat, where you play as an FBI agent framed for murder who's trying to clear his name.
Thomas, I don't got all day here. Let's get a move on.
To do this, you're tracking down a serial killer who's going around killing serial killers, which is about as dark and edgy as a plot could ever be. This has you on the run in a dodgy city, avoiding vagrants, hobos, and deformed junkies who all want to bash your skull in with whatever they can get their hands on. Literally, the enemies will pick up anything they can get their hands on in their efforts to remove you from the chores of living. Running on the Jupiter engine, the atmosphere in Condemned is still incredible. The sound design might be some of the best in any horror game, and the lighting effects are still gorgeous. It also has a really simple but effective combat system. You either attack or you block. That's literally it. But it leaves the combat so open-ended because successfully blocking an attack from an enemy works like a parry, leaving them open for a follow-up attack. It sounds simple, but when enemies start feigning their attacks and adding in different combos, the combat becomes a lot more challenging, but also incredibly satisfying. You can pick up pipes, planks of wood, even rip the door off a locker to use as a makeshift weapon. At times you'll come across pistols, shotguns or rifles, but ammo is limited and enemies have a high pain tolerance. You can even hit someone so hard that their goddamn teeth fall out. Add in some masterful jump scares and some unsettling scripted sequences, and you've got a recipe for a fantastic horror game. If there's only one game on this entire list you have to play, well, Condemned is that one game. So that's it for my list. I'm sure there's a few other games I probably could have talked about, but this was just the ones I could think of that I enjoyed playing through. Honourable mentions goes to Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, which I only didn't include because it can be an absolute asshole to get running. I was gonna suggest the Fear series too, but those games are really more action oriented than horror, just with a few scary scenes here and there. And anyway, those games are more well known than your mum, so most people probably know about them anyway. There's another good indie game called Monstrum, which is a procedurally generated game set on a ship in the middle of the ocean, where you're avoiding one of 4 random monsters as you craft the means to escape. That one's also pretty good. Also, if you're after a more action-packed horror shooter, well, check out the indie game called Nightmare Reaper, a game that's got a pretty good mix of shooting combined with some mysterious spooky elements as you're playing as a young woman locked inside of a mental hospital. Other than that, I hope everyone enjoys their Halloween and goes out and gets a migraine from eating too much sugar or drinking too much alcohol. And if you'd like to see more of these kind of videos, well, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.